The conference room was alive with the low hum of voices, the rhythmic tapping of polished shoes against marble floors, and the muted shuffle of expensive suits brushing past one another. It was the kind of place where power was not only spoken but worn, draped across shoulders in tailored jackets and gleaming in the shine of cufflinks. At the center of the room, beneath the sterile glow of white lights, sat a car engine that gleamed like a trophy. Its intricate maze of wires, bolts, and cold steel was more than machinery, it was a symbol of prestige, wealth, and innovation. Executives moved around it like predators circling prey, their conversations sharp with numbers, specifications, and calculations that echoed off the glass walls. Then, without warning, the sharp silence was pierced by laughter. At the head of the long glass table stood Isabella Harrington, a woman who seemed to embody ambition itself. She was the youngest female CEO in the city's history, and she carried herself with a confidence so striking that even her presence demanded obedience. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was not soft, not inviting. It was the kind of beauty forged in steel and fire, unyielding, unapologetic, and edged with danger. When she laughed, it wasn't warm or kind. It was mocking, cruel, and directed at a man who looked as though he didn't belong in this world of skyscrapers and power. His name was Marcus Reed. He didn't wear a tailored suit or a polished watch. Instead, he stood in the room in his janitor's uniform, the fabric worn thin, its surface marked by stains that told the story of labor and survival. His hands were strong, calloused by years of hard work, and his eyes carried the kind of weariness that comes from holding up more than just your own life. Marcus was a single father, raising a little girl on his own after life had stolen from him more than most men could bear. He had taken this job to keep food on the table, to keep a roof over their heads, and on this particular day, he had only come into the room to clean the floor. Yet something had made him pause. His cart squeaked to a stop as his eyes locked onto the engine at the center of the table. While to others it was just machinery, to Marcus it was alive, a heartbeat of steel and motion, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Once, long ago, he had dreamed of becoming an engineer. He had studied with passion at a small community college, his mind hungry for knowledge, his hands eager to shape ideas into reality. But life had not been kind. When his wife died giving birth to their daughter, Marcus's world collapsed. Dreams of a career, ambitions of building something greater, all of it had been sacrificed in an instant. He had traded classrooms for night shifts, notebooks for cleaning rags, and ambition for survival. His only focus became his daughter, keeping her fed, safe, and loved. Yet, in that moment, as his gaze lingered on the engine, something stirred inside him. Isabella's sharp voice cut through the air, breaking whatever fragile bubble of memory Marcus had been trapped in. She had caught the way he studied the machine, his quiet intensity betraying knowledge far beyond what his uniform suggested. Her smirk spread slowly, deliberately cruel. "You think you can fix this?" she asked, her tone dripping with arrogance. Around her, the executives chuckled, their laughter like the sound of knives being sharpened. And then, with a flick of her hand as though tossing a coin into the air, Isabella delivered her final blow. "If you can fix this engine right here, right now, I'll marry you." The room erupted in laughter, mocking and merciless. To them, it was a joke, a spectacle meant to humiliate. But to Marcus, it wasn't about her offer. It wasn't about marriage or pride or the derision that clung to every smirk in the room. To him, it was a chance to prove that he was more than the uniform he wore, more than the labels people gave him. It was a chance to reclaim a piece of the man he had once been. With his heart pounding like a drum in his chest, Marcus stepped forward. His palms were damp, his shirt clung to his back, and his appearance screamed of long hours spent scrubbing the floors that others walked across without a thought. But his eyes were steady, sharp, and unshaken. When he spoke, his voice was deep and calm, slicing through the noise around him. He asked for a few tools. The room fell into a hush, and for the first time, Marcus Reed was no longer invisible. Some of the executives snickered, their polished shoes tapping impatiently against the floor, while others leaned toward each other to whisper, "This is ridiculous." Their disbelief hung in the air, thick with arrogance, but Marcus didn't let their words touch him. His focus wasn't on their laughter or even on Isabella, who leaned back in her chair with her arms crossed, her expression painted with the smug certainty of someone who expected failure. He pushed all of it aside and set his gaze on the engine in front of him. Every wire, every bolt, every connection seemed to call back pieces of his past, nights when he had studied diagrams by candlelight, the dim glow barely illuminating his notes while his daughter slept peacefully at his side. He remembered the scent of oil and grease in his father's old garage, the quiet lessons whispered about patience, precision, and persistence. Those memories flowed through him as he reached for the tools and began to work. At first, his movements were clumsy, awkward from years of distance between himself and the craft he once loved. His hands shook slightly, rusty from time, and the faint chuckles around the room grew sharper, more biting. But Marcus refused to give them his attention. He tuned out the jeers and narrowed his world down to the puzzle in front of him. Slowly, steadily, his hands grew surer, guided by instinct and fueled by something none of those executives could ever measure, his love for his daughter. Beads of sweat rolled down his brow as he adjusted wires, tested circuits, and tightened bolts with careful precision. Each twist of the wrench, each connection made, was a silent vow to her. The conference room, once loud with arrogant laughter, began to shift. The mocking smirks faded into puzzled frowns, then into hushed murmurs, and finally into stunned silence. Executives who moments ago had mocked him now leaned in with curiosity, watching the janitor's calloused hands move with a confidence that no degree or title could fake. Even Isabella's playful arrogance faltered. The smirk that had curled her lips loosened as her eyes fixed on Marcus with something she hadn't expected, uncertainty. This wasn't a stumble or a fool's attempt. He was rebuilding the machine before their eyes. Yet Marcus's mind wasn't truly in that glass-walled room. It was at home, with Lyanna. His daughter, 7 years old, with eyes so bright they could cut through even his darkest days. He thought of her laughter, of her endless questions, of the nights when she asked him why other kids had more than they did. He thought of how he always swallowed his pain, forcing a smile to tell her that their little world of two was enough, even when he feared it wasn't. He thought of the promise he had whispered to her mother in a hospital room heavy with grief, when the weight of loss had nearly broken him, "I'll protect her. I'll give her everything I can." And in that moment, it wasn't the engine he was fixing. It was his promise. With one final adjustment, the machine roared to life. The sound was sharp and alive, filling the conference room with a sudden, undeniable energy. The engine's hum echoed against the glass walls, not just noise but a declaration of triumph. Gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by scattered applause that grew louder, a wave of disbelief and admiration spreading through the room. Executives exchanged stunned glances, shaking their heads as though unable to process what they had just witnessed. Isabella's face, once painted with smug confidence, froze in shock. She had expected a spectacle of humiliation, but instead she had been handed something she hadn't anticipated: victory. Marcus stood there, sweat clinging to his brow, his chest rising with the weight of his effort, but his gaze was steady and calm. For him, this moment was not about Isabella's dare or the applause of the powerful men and women around him. It wasn't even about silencing the laughter. It was about something far greater. It was about dignity. About proving that worth could not be measured by suits, cufflinks, or the labels stitched into uniforms. It was about showing his daughter, even if she would never see this moment, that her father was more than the man who mopped floors. He was someone who still carried within him the fire of his dreams, and he had just proven it to the world. He was a man who could rise when the world tried to keep him down. But the story didn't end with the roar of an engine in a glass-walled conference room. Something had shifted in the air that day, something Marcus himself couldn't yet name. The executives, men and women who had spent their lives surrounded by wealth, prestige, and the assumption that only the polished deserved respect, found themselves drawn toward him. When the meeting ended, several of them approached him, not with sneers or dismissive glares, but with genuine curiosity. They asked about his background, about where he had learned so much, about what experience had given him the steady hands and sharp mind that had just humbled them all. For the first time in years, someone looked past the janitor's uniform and the squeaky cart. For the first time in years, Marcus was being seen for his skills, for the man he was, not the job he carried. Across the room, Isabella remained silent. The weight of her arrogance pressed heavy on her shoulders as she watched the shift unfold before her eyes. Her mocking laughter, once loud and cruel, had transformed into Marcus's greatest opportunity. The humiliation she had intended for him had instead backfired, placing him in the center of admiration and respect. She, too, was forced to reckon with what she had seen, a man who refused to bow, a man who stood taller in humility than she did in power. Days later, the change became real. Marcus was called into an office, not to clean, but to sit across from men who offered him a position within the company's automotive division. He was not being handed a broom this time, but tools, an apprenticeship as a mechanic, a chance to step back into the world he had once loved but been forced to abandon. It wasn't just a promotion. It was the unlocking of a door that had long been slammed shut in his face, the chance to prove not only to others but to himself that his life could still move forward. When Marcus returned home that evening, the weight of exhaustion was softened by something new, hope. Lyanna ran to him the moment the door opened, her small arms wrapping around his neck, her laughter filling the little apartment that had too often echoed with silence. She looked at him with those bright eyes, asking how his day had been, and Marcus found himself smiling through tears. He told her, carefully, gently, that things were about to change. He told her that maybe those dreams she whispered about, new shoes, stacks of books, perhaps even piano lessons, were no longer impossible wishes. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream alongside her. Weeks blurred into months, and the promise of that day blossomed into reality. Marcus worked tirelessly, pouring himself into the craft he had once abandoned. His hands, though roughened by years of mopping floors, adapted quickly, guided by the love of machinery and the determination to never waste this second chance. His colleagues respected him not just for his ability to repair what others could not, but for his humility, his relentless dedication, and the way he spoke of his daughter with unwavering pride. Every conversation about Lyanna lit up his face, reminding everyone around him that his strength was not born of ambition alone, but of love. Even Isabella changed. At first, she watched from a distance, her pride warring with the memory of her own cruelty. But as the months passed, she began to see him differently. Not as the janitor she had once mocked, not as a pawn in her cruel joke, but as a man who embodied resilience and quiet strength. Though the words she had flung at him about marriage had been meant as ridicule, she could not deny the admiration that slowly grew in her heart, for the man who had refused to break when she tried to belittle him, and for the example he set for everyone around him. The story of that day spread beyond the walls of the conference room. It became a whispered legend in hallways and boardrooms, told with awe and reverence. The tale of the janitor who turned insult into triumph, who reignited an engine and, in doing so, reignited his life, became a symbol of grit and dignity. Marcus hadn't simply fixed a machine that day. He had fixed the way people saw him. Perhaps, too, he had fixed the way some of them saw the world.